on the road. Welcome to Evolution Hour. We're starting a little bit earlier because we got and we got Jackson Wheat here. Yay! So there's all of our little typewriters and clocks and so forth and so on. And Troubles in Paradise, Methodology of Creationism. Welcome to Evolution Hour. Let me try to get some stuff going here. And there we go. And we got you on here. Hi.
Hello,
Jackson. We're starting a little bit early because the connections are well, and who knows how long things will last. And as soon as anybody starts showing up in the live chat, we'll be able to spot that as well. Hello, Brian Stevens. Hi, Brian. We're starting a little bit early on here because Jackson was able to show up for the show, and we got the jibber jabbering going on here. The connections are going rather well, so we'll see how we do on things. Now, find out whether or not I can get the little thing with our stupid little picture-in-picture down there. I keep on wondering why that's not picturing properly. It seems very finicky. My button doesn't seem to be doing anything. So anyway, such as it goes. The main part of the show will be replacing Darwin. We're continuing on. We're slogging through into what the hell I got? Let me find my there we go. We're at the very end of the biogeography argument. And then we've also got a really neat material that's going to be going after Standing for Truth and his interview with David McQueen, the young Earth creationist that is just the cornucopia of stupid. That's going to be leading to a massive amount of linkages on that. Let me immediately get my patrons out of the way to thank all those who have continued to support the show in this time of weirdness. We got our colleagues Hendril and Colton, Eric, Sarah, Seshi, our researchers Travis, Ian Chen, who just kicked butt with Nephilim Free and Nephilim Rage Quit. We'll have to talk about that. Convert Me, Stephen Early, Neil, James Fitzwater, History Minor, Ralph McFadden, Apologia, Benjamin Simpson, Speed of Sound, Sister Researchers, Duranku, Totus Real, Christopher Johnson, our friends Daniel, Steve Bauman, Marigale Beddoes, Insects Are Cool, Devin Reeves, Martin Nielsen, Paul the Skeptic, Papaluficus, Bo Rasmussen, Alex Stone, Paul Williams, and our legacy patrons, who I will always thank as well. Jen and Jody, Mike, John, Keith, Andrew, Dyer, Yui, Mona, Brad, Daniel, Nanya, Steigel, Sun, Sky, Stone, Oda, German, Truce, Everett, Sanson, Sewer, Weisbaum. For those who didn't catch the truncated debate that Ian Chen had, and he'd been itching to have a debate with Nephilim Free, and it was just a hilarious piece of comedic. Ian was dressed in a Kent Hovind style flowered shirt. He had all the little props and things around that connected up with a whole bunch of creationists, and he was imitating their styles, including Raw Matt's a fictional PLOS biology paper, and it was just hilarious. But it started off with some tough snarks about prayer that apparently really ticked off Nephilim Free. So Nephi Rage quit before the show had gotten more than a few minutes down the line. Erica was in positive stitches as the moderator, as seeing what was going on. And anyway, he continued for about 5 or 10 minutes. Unfortunately, Jackson, a part of his plan was later on in his presentation, he was going to give Rocks Were There a big plug, but he never got around to that because Nephilim
mentioned it.
Rage quit. Yeah.
He mentioned it at the start.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, he did it at the show, but he had actually quite a presentation. What he was doing at the point when the show fizzled out, he was just beginning to go through the various quotes that Raw Matt had assembled in his stupid paper, and he was going through and looking up the primary source material, and in a beautiful graphic to highlight how Raw Matt was misrepresenting all the material. Let's see. Brian Stevens has shared it on Twitter. Not sure who will see it. They think they have me on a S-band or something. Nobody reacted for 20 minutes solid. But that one was a very interesting one. It would have been funky to see what drivel Nephilim would have offered had he stayed put and discussed the issues on there. But it didn't quite get to that point. And I somehow suspect Nephilim is never going to want to debate with Ian on any subject ever again.
Congratulations to Ian. You accomplished something that I could not, which is get Neff to leave you alone.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, you don't realize how lucky you are in that respect. But the thing is he has a wonderful theatrical quality and sharp razor wit. I knew that the material he was going to be presenting was really solid because he had vetted it with a bunch of us back and forth on things, and he was making sure that all of his stuff was nailed down properly and good source method stuff. But the fact that he was doing it in such a deliciously funny, snarky, satirical way that just added frosting on the cake. And Erica and we were watching in various venues, Dan Stern, Cardinale, and Coltman, and we were just positively spittle humor. It was just it was just so hilarious all the way down the line. Anyway, hi Brainbug, how's the arthropods doing? In fact, I think there will be discussions in due course about arthropods in future shows. Anyway, the first half about the evolution hour part with replacing Darwin, Jensen tried to dangle rheas, which are the flightless birds, cousins to emus and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
and Darwin had mentioned them briefly back in the day. He knew a little bit about the paleontology of them. And so what was funky about it is Jensen is trying to dangle the prospect that they somehow can be fitted into the flood without actually going into any detail. And so I decided to supply some detail. And so when I get the postings up there, Greg Loudon did a 2011 post on rheas and the birth of evolutionary theory that brings up an awful lot of material about their geology. And the problem is that in order to give a creationist position, you're going to have to work out what the pre-flood geology was. What are the continental distributions? Where did these animals live? And then how do they get from the ark to wherever it is they are, which of course is like in South America and places like that. There's a 2014 study by Baker that suggests that there are several origins of the various flightless lineages, of which rheas are one. And then there's a whole bunch of material on genetics. One that's a more recent paper than Jensen from 2019 that I'll be putting the link on, which is about the convergent regulatory roles that are apparently playing a part in why bird lineages go flightless. And so there's all this science work that's been done, and they keep on making sense of stuff. And all you get from Jensen is a promissory note on the non-existent pre-flood geology. A brain bug, is there a beetle kind? Oh, well, there's the convertible beetle, and then there's the ones that are the sedan beetles.
Wah,
and then
wah, wah.
or they're a rock band from Britain from the 1960s. Oh dear.
Oh yes, only two beetles gave birth to 330,000 species in 4,000 years.
Oh, Vesta says she'd love to see Ian's entire presentation. Yeah, I really would have loved to have had the whole thing done, because even from where he was starting, his presentation, his slides and stuff in there. Oh, when he put up this fake paper from PLOS Biology that Ian is professing to have written, it's just hilarious title. Something about quantum physics and tunneling effects and that disproving evolution. And it was just one of the most hilariously delightful creationist style overplaying your hand title that I really, really loved. It was marvelous. Brainbug says, you're talking about the flightlessness in response to Foster's rule. I'm not aware of that right off the bat. You're ahead of me on that one. Do you know anything about that, Jackson?
Foster's rule sounds
familiar.
Foster's
rule.
I'll look it up. Also known as the island rule or island effect, is an ecogeographical rule in evolutionary biology stating that members of a species get smaller or bigger depending on the resources available.
Oh, that one, yeah. Yeah, I haven't actually thought of that in terms of insects, because insects operate in a constrained dynamic because of the limitation of the oxygen level. So if you got 50% oxygen level, like in the Carboniferous, you get really big bugs. Yes, you see, you're on the screen. Finally, this is very capricious as to why the little side image pops up or not. And it's possible that I'm a clumsy oaf and haven't quite figured out how to run the thing properly, or it goes through cycles. But anyway, we seem to be okay with that image knocking around in there, and we'll just leave it as a run.
Yeah,
I've
Foster's
always heard
rule
of the
sounds
rule applying to
familiar.
bigger. I've heard it applied to dinosaurs and mastodons and various other ones. And so I've seen it in a lot of the vertebrates. But frankly, yeah, if
Right.
there's stuff that's been done with arthropods, brain bug, shoot us some information there on Twitter. I'd like to know about that. Oh, you did, you
Oh,
little
Foster's rule
bastard.
for flightlessness in aves in isolation.
Mm,
Sure.
yeah.
Some, I mean, well, it depends. Maybe, I guess it depends because some birds get larger on islands, some get smaller on islands. So I guess it all depends on what environment they end up.
Yeah, and there are probably genetic factors and predisposition elements and ecological things and dietary circumstances. It sounds like a nonlinear system to me, that it's difficult to pin down. But um, if one is going to think through this thing from a creationist perspective, don't you have to know where the islands are and where the continental landmasses are, and therefore work out what the landmasses were before the flood and then what was happening during the flood, and accounting for why the fossil distribution is what it is during the flood, case by case by case, detail by detail by detail. You get the impression this is going to get a little too complicated for the average creationist?
Yeah, probably. I don't think Andrew Snelling's going to be getting on this anytime soon.
Oh, and in fact, that's if you want a cottage game to worry about. Where's Waldo? Where's the detailed map of the paleo worlds? Because when you see even Andrew Snelling's papers and various other ones, first off, odds are they won't put a map up at all, or if they do, it's really cartoon level of a big blob of stuff and very generic, not the kind of detail you get into when you're reading a geology paper where they're working out the actual fault zones and wind distribution patterns and biogeographical interchanges and all the other stuff that's happening in the real paleobiology area. Brainbug said did a video on Lord Howe's
Hmm.
stick insect in October that talked about Foster's rule in arthropods. Yeah, that'd be a rather fascinating area to think about in terms of, from the bug's point of view, I suppose you can have something that goes from this big to this big, and that's just as much proportionally as going from a small predator to a much larger form, or vice versa, from the bug's point of view. But we're used to thinking of things in such a different scale. You bug people are having much more focus on that. Anyway, um, this pretty much concludes the exciting world of chapter 4 of Jensen's book. And so we'll be getting in then to chapter 5, where he's going into the ancestry argument, which he's doing in no better detail than he was doing the biogeography stuff. And so we'll get on to the really cute material, which is the part 2 stuff. And this was a viewer request. Somebody had seen back in November, Standing for Truth had interviewed creationist David McQueen, and I'll be putting the YouTube link to that up from November 20th. Now, McQueen is a rather fossilized example of creationism. He did some stuff back in the 1980s, and other than video material like this, that's kind of it. There's a piece at ICR that I'll be putting a link on, which is about the chemistry of oil explained by flood geology. And yeah. And he's also done a Praise Through Jesus Through Rocks book on minerals in 2014, which is being linked to in SFT's video. And one thing that picked up in the interview, McQueen made a big deal how he was particularly competent because his master's thesis had been published in a regular science journal. Well, I thought that was
Neat.
interesting. And when I looked it up, though, and I'll be putting a link up to this, it turned out to be a collaborative paper. It was not his
Sure.
master's thesis. It was a collaborative paper he had done with other people. No mention of his master's thesis work anywhere in it. So it's what likely is that elements of his work were being used in this collaborative paper in ways that apparently did not warrant specifically mentioning them. And that was about as far as we go. I think he's overplaying his hand in a way that's rather unjustified, but you'll be able to see it
I
in all the
mean,
Oh,
heck, we mentioned in rocks there are anti-evolutionists who can do perfectly fine works. The
yeah.
thing is, they usually don't because they choose not to.
Now, a reason why I began to become suspicious of McQueen's expertise is in this interview, he made a big deal about mentioning the Ghawar oil field of Kuwait. The problem is it's not in Kuwait, it's in Saudi Arabia. And so I'm
Well,
beginning to have the suspicion that what's going on in his memory of where things are and what things are may not exactly be razor sharp. And it turns out that as more and more research, when I went into more and more of this stuff, it just got worse. So there's I'm going to be putting in a 2010 review of the actual oil field and the geology of the Sorkabi area. And then we get into what is a corker. This is the thing that got Colton absolutely ballistic. It's that oil may have come from blood.
oh,
Blood.
yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, so there's a quote about note the structural similarity of the crude oil porphyrin not only to chlorophyll but also to heme, a component of blood. Because of evolutionary bias, many petroleum geologists think of crude oil forming from mostly plant material. While more research needs to be done, it seems the crude oil porphyrins could just as well be the decayed remains of blood. Is it possible that the chemistry of petroleum could contain trace biochemical markers of vertebrate animal and even ancient antediluvian human blood? Well, that 1986 article has led absolutely nowhere in the creationist literature, as far as I've been able to find. Nobody has followed up on it at all. And Colton had a 2011 posting on that from Questioning Answers in Genesis blog that I'll be putting a link up to, which you can read, which is worthy of the amusement.
Well, RJ, it's you know what that kind of reminds me of is their the one paper that anti-evolutionists have on index fossils. The one technical piece that they ever wrote was by Woodmarap back in the 80s, wasn't it?
Yeah. And that is like, and the fact that nothing had been done building on that. See, if you have a groundbreaking work and your field is really hot and accurate, it acts like a mall where people build off of it and apply it to new data field and build an ever larger array of technical literature accounting for the data field, unless it's wrong, in which case all you've got is just the one little book buried back there like a little pimple, and the science moves on and the creationists move on because it's not going anywhere. And this, I think, is falling into exactly that same category. On geology, McQueen did another 1986 creationist paper on the Appalachian Mountains, which had very little documentation, and which he didn't even really draw on, including a 1973 paper by Harris that is open access, fortunately, so I'm putting the linkage to that it was incorrectly listed in McQueen's paper, even in that he mistitled it.
Oh, really?
So there's all of this evidence piling up that McQueen is not a very reliable scholar in every possible respect. And meanwhile,
creationist, not a reliable scholar.
Yeah, I know this is. You facepalm yourself so much, a poor fellow, because this happens so much. We're constantly bumping into it. Best Brian Stevens tells it took one geology course, no mention of a flood. Let's show that one. Additional spent my early IT career in the oil field working with geologists. They did not mention the flood either. Yeah, this is the thing we made a big deal out of in the rocks were there over the fact that although there are a small number of young Earth creationists who work in the oil industry, none of them use their young Earth creationism None of them can think of a single example of anything in their work that confirms young Earth creationism. And more importantly, the oil industry doesn't pay any attention to flood geology because it would be a waste of money if they did. And the ones who tried, Zion Oil Company, fell flat on their face. They have never been able to actually find oil based upon that creationist model. And so Brian says they only took for 2 years a basic course. None of that will have changed. This is an area that you could go into any geology work in any college anywhere on the planet. It will be exactly the same situation. Flood geology has been utterly useless in the actual workaday world of the fossil fuel industry. And this is both the petroleum industry and also minerals and anything else. They have to know, as Colton will say, ACES stratigraphy, ACES modeling, that you need to understand all of these layers and how they interconnect as landscapes to work out circumstances that things are occurring. Anyway, we're still trying to lure Colton to start doing videos on these kinds of subjects. You know, he's basically been a poster on the side and stuff, but he needs to dive in to do more of that. Hear that, Colton? You need to get on that. Anyway,
he should. I would definitely watch his videos.
Absolutely. On the geology front on that Appalachian area, there's a bunch of technical papers that relate to the mountain building event that was producing the Appalachians. And so there's a nice paper from 1990 on it that I'll be putting a link up. And McQueen has a long trajectory. Shortly after that 1986 work he was doing, he was popping up in the creationism subculture scene. So McIver, who had been studying the creationists at that level in the 1980s, put a posting up about him describing McQueen figuring in when they went on a tour of the Grand Canyon and how he was explaining what the creationist model was. So I'll have a nice quote up about that. They were still debating whether or not there was a sudden rush of water, may have been released as late as 200 to 300 years after the Noahic flood, but most creationists assume it occurred immediately following the flood. This was the uncertainty about the fact that they got the rocks being laid down for most of the canyon. And then the canyon formed when a post-flood lake drains super fast and actually cuts the canyon, which gets involved with the issue of how do you make a canyon that's an incised canyon through a muck of not solidified rock yet and make it look the way it does? The answer is you can't do that. So the kind of uncertainty about that sequence of flood, post-flood in relation to the Grand Canyon that was in the case in the mid-1980s hasn't gone away decades later. This is 1987. That's before you are born, Jackson. This thing is, you are younger than the confusion in creationism about the sequence of events that produced the Grand Canyon.
Somehow that doesn't surprise me, though.
Yeah. But that's how long ago all of these things are. Where things become fun, and this is a reason why I'm trying to put in my 8 cents worth, because of people that are in your generation, Jackson's generation, young people, which is a swath from people born from 1990 on, will only know the view of creationism that's presented online. So they'll get Answers in Genesis and ICR and these various postings that are going on there. And unless they burrow rather deeply, this older material that's out there buried in the corners, that was the case of the creationism before it mutated into the present model, they may not realize it's there. And so they are only getting the current propaganda and not reflecting the fact that you've got long-standing problems here and you haven't resolved them, have you? So that was the thing we really had fun with in writing The Rocks Were There, is putting in that history and explaining and also the goalpost moving that has occurred on so many of these issues in the geology and the biology front. Jensen is a perfectly fine example of somebody who's a goalpost mover. He's sort of laying out new goalposts. He, as we'll be finding out in future things, he sort of accepts horse evolution, kind of, sort of, not to the point where he actually explicitly accepts it. So he sort of accepts fossils. And remember, we made a big deal in the rocks were there about the fact that Jensen, jaw dropper, where he says, well, creationists have always accepted transitional forms.
Yeah. Yeah, I think modern day creationists, the ones still publishing at AIG, disagree.
Yeah. And yet Jensen is saying that perfectly straight face. Now, somebody who is a credulous git, who will just read the Jensen version of things, is going to completely miss the point on this stuff. We're not yet done with the McQueen episode here, because there's yet more to come. So, along the way, Colton, in his discussion that he had brought up to me about McQueen and all the rest, he had cited a paper by Al-Hajiri 2009 on basin and petroleum system modeling. So for those of you who want to dive in to how real live geologists construct their basin modeling to work out how to find oil and how to even determine when the oil was and all this kind of stuff, that'll be the technical paper that will give an excellent introduction to it. Now, for cherry on top of this weird Sunday, even though it's Wednesday, McQueen also figures in recent claims to have found Noah's Ark. So there's a brand new posting, a hilarious one by Carl Figgens, who is an archaeologist who has taken issue with the pseudo-archaeology. He's been following for years these various ark hunters, and McQueen's bunch which are connected to a bunch of Chinese Christian creationists, and they've been hunting around and taking expeditions to mysterious sites that no one in Armenia and Anatolia and all the rest, and it's hilarious. So I'll be putting the link up to that. The pseudo archaeology of Noah's Ark. He's got there's I'll stick that up for the camera there. There's the wonderful picture of the various critters involved, and the one on the second from the right on your end is Randall Price, and then the one right in the middle is David McQueen, the geologist. Don Patton is standing next to him, and then on either side is Andrew Ewan, who is this NAMI arc hunter, and then there's Yang Wen, another filmmaker, and then over in the corner, Clara Way, non-NAMI, and she's labeled here as fraudster.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so they're apparently people who have been scamming to raise money to do these things, and then there are some pictures later on where Patton even went in and looked at some of these places and was very suspicious that this really was staged for them, and so it's just ludicrously sad material, and we can anticipate that McQueen is going to continue to circulate around in the standing for truth level of modern YouTube apologetics, not writing technical papers even at AIG or answers at ICR or any of that, because he's too far below the important people in the creationism movement even to be taken seriously at that. Had Standing for Truth had little radar things out to notice where people are figuring in the case of matters, that he should have been curious about the lack of impact of McQueen, the fact that he's not being cited by regular creationists. But then again, since when?
RJ, they really do think. Standing really does think, and I know because I asked him just yesterday, he really does think creationists are a big deal in the scientific community. Wow. He really does think that there are fewer and fewer evolutionists, that creationism is just winning. They have no grasp.
I'm very sorry for Standing, because that's absolutely delusional.
I mean, seriously, yeah, just literally, just go into a university. Don't take my word for it. Just go into a university and ask each biology faculty member, do you accept evolution? Almost all of them, I guarantee, will say yes.
Yeah.
And he lives in a different universe.
Yeah. And I know because in my TIP project, I'm physically measuring all of this crap to where I can see how many anti-evolutionists are. I've lost your poor picture in picture. I'm sorry, Jackson.
Oh, that's
Um,
all right.
that there are only about 60 main fact claimants in anti-evolutionism. There's a larger body of around 150 who could be fairly claimed to have published stuff in regular science journals, none of
Mm-hmm.
whom are terribly notable in the regular scientific field. And
Right.
I know who those are because I keep track of them. So at the moment, I've got a data field of a bit over 28,000 technical papers in my data field. Those are written by some 70,000 scientists, of which at most you could say a couple have any connections to any anti-evolutionists because they might be a co-author with them. In which Jeffrey
Um,
Tompkins pops up once in a while. I mean, they're absolutely trivial, and none of them are heavy guns in any of their disciplines. They're absolutely irrelevant. And so Standing, who only bumps into technical literature ricocheting because it's the stuff that Jensen and Tompkins and Sanford's company bring up, has no clue how completely irrelevant creationism is to that field. It's
no,
in a completely, it's as bad as the Trumpistas thinking that Trump won the election.
I
I mean,
think
it's in the
it's
same
I
ballpark.
think it's funny because you have Standing in his group, the Brain Trust, and then and they are just in a different world. Whereas on the other hand, you kind of have, I think, the Discovery Institute and Reasons to Believe, they acknowledge that most of the working scientists are in fact evolutionists. They don't like it, but they at least accept it.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, Eat Meal. Haven't seen you in a long time, Eat Meal. Yeah. Gee, Willy Willikers. Wait. What you say? They all accept evolution? Which definition are you using? Well, not Kent Hovind, I can tell you that. Uh,
None of
the
Kent Hovind's definitions.
Yeah. No, the area here, and the easy way to find all of this is to just dive in and look at the technical literature yourself and find out who's doing what where. You can do this easily. I would recommend one that I'll stick this in there, pnas.org, Proceedings in the National Academy of Sciences, because this is the easy peasy one. First of all, it's open access after a year by definition. So, and an awful lot of the incoming hot papers are open access even from the get-go. It's weekly, so check every week. It comes out on Tuesday. In fact, I got to check this week to find out what new PNAS papers have shown up. Typically, I'm glomming on to a half a dozen or a dozen technical papers that are coming in that are relevant to the Troubles in Paradise Project data field. But anyway, it's a useful one to get you introduced to the people who are doing the work and see how they're busily doing their work in their various subdisciplines. And anti-evolutionism is just irrelevant to this. And I've seen no indication whatsoever that there's any closet movement among the scientific community, that they're just cowering in fear because of the terrible Darwinists that are preventing them from coming out and saying, well, no, what you have are, well, the Discovery Institute list has about 1,100 people on it. So you've got Young Earth Creationism Institute for Creation Research has a bigger mailing list than that. That they have many more thousands of people, that there are a block of many thousands of scientifically trained creationists who are absolutely convinced of their positions, but the vast majority of those are not in relevant fields. It's hard to find an anti-evolutionist who's a paleontologist. Gunter Beckley is about one of the very few ones. You've got a handful of geologists who do paleontology from Loma Linda University, the Adventist College in California, I think it is. And again, they publish papers every once in a while. They're in that little handful of 150 or so that have actually got some paper trail behind them. And they can do perfectly fine technical work, and they keep their creationism in the backlog. But the main issue is, do the creationists have a model that, Lisa is asking a question. What do you think of January 6th? It was downright disturbing and crazy, Looney Tunes. I only found out about it as I woke up and was listening to the radio and that, and I'm hearing about all of this stuff that everybody is talking about. And then only later on am I starting to see the actual events transcribed. And a lot of people were posting the stuff they were getting off of YouTube and stuff that people had posted from their smartphones and all the rest. And for that matter, the perpetrators were idiotically posting. I mean, this is a revolution where everybody is saying, "Hey, here I'm doing sedition. Watch me," and running around through the Capitol building. It's absolutely disgusting. It's un-American. It's as unpatriotic as you can get. And I lay the blame squarely at the weird bunch of Tortugan ideologues who are circulating in the Trumpista movement and Donald Trump himself, who just keeps bullshit lying through his teeth on this election issue, which I don't know, honestly, whether he just was doing it for the money, which he has certainly been. He's pulled in a couple $100 million in donations for this investigation of the voter fraud, of which there's apparently a fist fight because supposedly most of this was to go to the Republicans to pay off their campaign debt. But no, he's going to try to get that himself, and there may be lawsuits and blah, blah, blah. But he may actually have begun to believe a lot of this propaganda himself, like Mussolini or Hitler and others and Napoleon over the years, who actually believe their own press agentry and become completely disjointed. I was entirely approving of the second impeachment, which has just passed. My own representative, Kathy McMorris Rogers, did not vote for it. I will never forget that. She did legitimately back off and not vote to reject the electoral vote, which she had planned to do. And she backed off of that when people were rampaging in the Congress. And that discouraged her a bit, but she still would not impeach him. And so I would just say, Kathy, what exactly would it take? Can Mr. Trump do absolutely nothing that will get your ire up? Well, I'm ired. So anyway, Titan here, it says that the phrase lunatic fringe was invented for these people, including Trump. Well, I will use my word, the Tortugans. What we've got here is an absolute Tortugan phenomenon. Many of them, in fact, if you look at most creationists, they are indeed Trumpistas. There are very few examples that I encounter, I mean, as in like a couple. And so the same mindset that allows people to do the bad science that we've been seeing with McQueen and Standing for Truth and Answers in Genesis and all the rest, that translates over into their political frame. And so they rely on unreliable secondary sources. They don't fact check them. They don't work out their model of clearly what they think happened. And because Trump is a pathological liar, a Roy Cohn style liar, as I constantly use the hashtag on Twitter. Thank you, Brian. You posted to Tortugan yesterday. Yes. The Tortugan mind is a turtle shell mind. They are impervious to evidence. So down under there in the little mind shell, information blobs in, just bounces off. Doesn't have any effect at all. Tortugans don't easily change their mind. Evidence doesn't matter. There's a whole psychological discipline looking at how people of this kind of ideological bent just dig in. The more information you throw at them, the more resilient they become to it. And in fact, there's a psychological approach as to how, if you're going to persuade somebody to change their mind, you've got to kind of just slide in ever so gently things to get them to start examining that. And that's in fact a source methods issue of where you've got to get them to the point where they are actually starting to fact check what they are repeating. And once they start doing that, then they can find out, they've been sold a bill of goods. My suspicion is the vast majority of the people who marched off to rampage at the Capitol firmly believed the claptrap that Trump had won the election and that it was being stolen by Biden. Now, that's just nonsense. And it's exactly the same level of nonsense that if you were arguing that we didn't land on the moon, or that there's no evidence for evolution, or that vaccines cause autism, or any of the other Looney Tunes beliefs that people have. But unlike just being cranial blockage of the rectum wrong on the age of the earth, as a creationist would be, this is something where they were trying to take over the government, that possibly killing, maybe stringing up Mike Pence if they had found him. They were saying they were gonna. There was a one guy running around with zip ties. What was he going to use those for? You know, that he had some old Christmas trees that he needed to pack up, and he was just carrying the zip ties along with him. No, there was some dangerous stuff going on here. We know the little antler guy, the QAnon shaman, is a weird mismatch. I put a posting up on Twitter and also on my Facebook page of a little taxonomy that this guy had done, looking into his background. There were people who had attended school with him. He is just a weird amalgam, smorgasbord style mind. That there's bits of New Age veganism and then political weird stuff. And he apparently was living at home with his mom. And it was just a pile up of, this is the image of the Trump Republican Party. This is the party of Abraham Lincoln and Teddy Roosevelt. And it's turned into this. This is just, as a historian, I'm absolutely appalled. Brian Stevens says Lakota Law had a good post on him as well. There's going to be, Lisa, there's going to be criminal charges up the yin yang on so many people on this. And there's going to be some that will be going, well, I didn't know it was going to go like that. Well, la-di-da. But the thing is that the people upstairs, there's issues that are obviously going to need an investigation about whether or not there was a deliberate attempt to keep the Capitol relatively undefended. Look at the difference when Black Lives Matters protests were done. My God, they brought out the National Guard and the helicopters and the tear gas. And with this, it was like mush. And they come slamming in there. The police were completely overwhelmed. One was beaten to death. You have just pathetic rebel in there. And the pathetic thing about Donald Trump, and why he certainly deserves to be removed from office even on the very last day, is that he has been so shameless, so heedless, so cavalier, indifferent to what the effects of his words are, that he goes out and preens like Mussolini at the balcony and gins everybody up. We're going to march to the Capitol. Well, not we. He doesn't do that. He said he was going to lead them. And that would have been leadership. I mean, if you're going to do a putsch, do it honestly. And you walk in front of the crowd and you march to the Capitol and you try to take over the government that way. At least that's a level of honesty. But Trump is too lazy to do that. And he skedaddled back to the White House to watch it all on the big screen TV and could care less. And people are trying to call him the president of the United States, our employee, remember, to get off his fat ass and do his presidenting and deal with this. No, he's just watching it. He's like a kid. Ooh, apparently when Mr. Trump watches something live, he can't be torn away from it. If it's on TiVo, he'll pause and answer a telephone call. But if it's live, ooh, laser pointer, ooh, because it excites him like an infant. This is terrible things to have to say about a president of the United States. I'm a historian, and I've seen people up and down and in and out have varying levels of complex personalities and difficult backgrounds to themselves. And you've got your Andrew Jacksons, you've got your Warren Hardings, you have Franklin Roosevelt with his affairs, you've got a whole bunch of stuff going on. But they all pale into insignificance compared to Donald Trump, who is simultaneously an incompetent, pathetic, lying, un-American, self-serving, corrupt jerk, and objectively a complete failure as a president when it comes to leadership. So,
tell us what you really think, RJ.
Yes. Why are you hedging your words so much, RJ? Yeah, come out and say what you mean. Lisa says he's a psychopath. He may clinically be a psychopath or a sociopath, and there are tests that are done and it's going to be beyond man, woman, camera, television thing to be able to test that out. And
There was some psychologist who diagnosed him. I think it was right after he first started as having like clinical narcissism.
oh,
So yeah,
that's there's no doubt about that. If there any, we've had narcissistic presidents before. Teddy Roosevelt was a significant narcissist, but he was also an accomplished president. He was a good
right,
writer.
yeah.
He was a governor. He had tons of skills, in addition to being a lot about him. But Donald Trump is just a narcissist, and he's a pathological narcissist in that literally you can go back before he became president on any subject whatsoever. In 5 seconds flat, it's going to be about him. And it doesn't matter what it is. And he can be there giving somebody a medal for something, and pretty soon it's about him because that's the kind of personality he is. His sister, or a niece, Mary, has done some development analysis there as well because she's known him in the family. And so the narcissism is extreme in his tendency to bully. There was the famous incident where his father, I think, or uncle or somebody, dumped a bowl of potatoes, over mashed potatoes on his head at dinner one time because he was just being such a snot. And apparently he was terribly humiliated by that. So one of the things I would recommend as punishment for Donald Trump in the years to come is to keep a lot of mashed potatoes handy
Is
as a
this
way.
like Alfred Hitchcock and the fried eggs?
And the fried egg, yes, yes. Oh, by the way, yes. As we're sliding along, this is you've seen now the To Catch a Thief.
Yes, with
Yes,
Cary
did you
Grant.
enjoy it?
Oh yes, I thought it was very good.
Yeah,
Yeah, Camilla and
yeah.
I liked it a lot.
It was one of the rare Hitchcock movies since we beat the dead horse of science material that we have up there, and we're actually now into the regular evolution hour on all that, and so we've covered all that, and I've just had a few light comments about our president of the United States, so we can maybe go even lighter on the thing that I was given some possible viewings of things, and so I was making some comments to Jackson about the Alfred Hitchcock films, and that To Catch a Thief with Cary Grant and the drop dead gorgeous Grace Kelly before she went off and married. In fact, I think that was just before when they were filming in along the Riviera. That's where she met Prince Rainier. And so that was ultimately the thing that eventually led off to her becoming the Princess Grace of Monaco. But it was a rare example of Hitchcock filming on location. And he was not a great fan of location filming because, control freak as he is, he couldn't control everything. He wanted to be able to judge not merely the physical sets, although there are some set pieces in the film, but there was just a wonderful amount of location filming. And it had a very droll bit. There's the scene, of course, where Cary Grant's on the bus. And in the old days, before you saw the movie in VistaVision widescreen, you would see Cary Grant, and he suddenly turns to the side on the bus, and you have no idea what he's looking at. Well, if you get
He's looking
widescreen,
at Alfred Hitchcock.
Albert Hitchcock is on the other side of the bus seat. And that's all of his little drollery in there. But anyway, the episode is that Hitchcock hated fried eggs. And he took his revenge on eggs in this movie because he scenes where the people in the restaurant are throwing eggs at him and they're hitting the glass that he's behind. And then the other one is when there's a fried egg at a restaurant or in their dinner and breakfast, and Jessie Royce Landis, who was playing Grace Kelly's mother, who's smoking, she puts the cigarette out and buries it in the middle of that egg. And it's a very distinctive scene.
I thought it was hilarious, or one of the other things I thought was hilarious was when the Grace Kelly goes down and brings the police up to the room, and her mother's like, "Honey, what are all these men doing here?" Because Cary Grant has gone out the window, and she's like, "Mom, the book is upside down."
Yeah, she's just reading the book and it's upside down. Yeah, Jessie Royce Landis was only in a couple of Hitchcock movies. She plays Cary Grant's mother, same Cary Grant, in North by Northwest, which was a weird because she wasn't nearly old enough to be his mother or him young enough to be her kid. in North by Northwest, but you didn't care because Jessie Royce Landis was absolutely delightful in just about anything she did. And that's what makes Hitchcock such a big fun to watch when he's in his prime, because the little side characters that go on, the ones that aren't necessarily the main characters, but the relatives and various other ones, are often some of the most magnificent performances that people did, because they're just beautifully written, cleverly executed, and all the rest. Anyway, so there's a bit of a sidelight on Hitchcock in that, and hopefully you'll plow your way through lots of Hitchcock. If you haven't seen Rear Window.
Oh, Rear Window is one of my favorites. I saw that in 6th grade because they took our class to the Robinson, which is a theater over here that shows old movies.
Theater.
I did actually, yeah. Back in the 1960s. No, but yeah, they took our 6th grade class to see that. I've also seen The Man Who Knew Too Much.
Which one? The color one or the black and white?
The color one.
Yeah, that's the remake. That's an interesting issue because there is a huge controversy over this in Hitchcockiana, and that is which one's better. The original version that was black and white, 1935, it was really his first big hit as a suspense filmmaker, and the 1956 version with James Stewart and Doris Day that is done in color and all the rest. And Hitchcock groupies are divided over which version they like. That there's a camp that prefers the one version versus the other. Hitchcock himself thought the remake was better because he was a more professional one. And I'll say the one thing, that the sequence, there's a depth to the plot, that there's a complexity to it. Plus, you get to hear Doris Day sing "Que Sera Sera" at the top of her lungs during the film. But the famous assassination scene in Albert Hall, where, by the way, you get to see Bernard Herrmann conducting. In there,
they've got the gun. They're waiting for the cymbal clap so they can pull the trigger.
Yeah, and if you compare the two versions, the color version I think is much more suspenseful. He's balancing the bits out better in the color remake version. But it is a much darker story, and it's got light humor to it as well. But he rebalanced it, and there were quite a few Hitchcock films that were remade by other directors. Lady on a Train, The Lady Vanishes was remade by a different director years later. The Agatha Christie story, and there were several others that have been remade over the years. But I didn't know too much.
We watched one other Hitchcock movie with Cary Grant last time, and I can't remember what it was.
Notorious?
No. It's the one where he's a spy. It's the one where he's a spy.
Notorious, yeah, with Ingrid Bergman.
Is that Notorious? Okay, I guess it is. Well, anyways, it's like
where Ingrid Bergman has been married off to a German agent played by Claude Rains, and he's actually falling in love with her and all that kind of stuff. And that was when Hitchcock came to. It was after Hitchcock came to America. David O. Selznick, who had done Gone with the Wind, lured Hitchcock to America to do Rebecca with Laurence Olivier and Joan Fontaine, and which was a super famous novel. I mean, it was like J.K. Rowling level famous at that time. And Hitchcock stayed and made a whole bunch of movies produced by David O. Selznick, of which Notorious was one of them. And Notorious skirted the boundary layers of the censors at the time. There's the notorious kiss. There was a rule in films that you could never have a kiss longer than like 20 seconds. And so Hitchcock framed the scene with Ingrid Bergman and Cary Grant coming in and doing a kiss and then pulling back and cuddling and rotating and talking and kissing a little more. And this thing lasts minutes, but no individual kiss is longer than the requirement. And he would just be, Hitchcock, there were two people in Hollywood who knew about how tight censors were and how to maneuver around them. Hitchcock was one of them. And he literally would work out the script and figure out what the censors would dislike and would put in other scenes that he knew they would be worse about, and he would negotiate those away so he could keep the scenes he wanted to begin with. And he did that
Oh my God.
with he was going on with that with To Catch a Thief and Notorious and various others. The other one who knew how to do this were the Marx Brothers. That they knew exactly the thing that would trigger off the censors, and they would put in extra stuff that would catch them like lightning rods and able to put in lines that they would slip under the boundary layer. And one of the ones from A Night at the Opera that they were surprised that the censors let slip through is Groucho Marx is going up the gangplank to go on a ship with Margaret Dumas, the fuddy-duddy lady that they were always conning. And she says, "Do you have everything?" And he says, "I haven't heard any complaints yet." And that they were expecting that one not to make it through the censors because it's actually quite a lewd line. And we're talking about luggage. Yeah, so Hitchcock was a great deal on that. That probably because Hitchcock started out as a film editor in silent era before he ever even started making movies, and he was making movies in the silent era before he got into sound. He was aware, frame by frame, item by item, thing by thing, exactly what a motion picture was assembled. And so he would be so mindful of the kinds of stuff where, he's had censors come in and they're objecting to this and this and this, and he gets a pattern. And so he understands exactly what they were doing on there. So anyway, that's a long way from Jensen and McQueen and creationism on there.
Well, if we're well, RJ,
yeah,
I loved well, one last point on the Hitchcock. I love the Rear Window a lot, and so I'm very happy that it was so prolific that like the theme of it shows up in other shows.
Oh yeah,
I like that a lot.
It's if you are a Hitchcock groupie and you or aren't one yet but want to be, you want a single film that's going to be quintessential pure Hitchcock. That's Rear Window, because it has everything that is essential about him. His use of editing, his use of a constrained frame where the entire movie takes place in a single set. There's a set that overlooks a big apartment block opening, and that's all one gigantic set, and everything takes place from that point. And if you'll remember from the story, almost everything is from the point of view of the balcony. That you have some occasional shots down or over and around, but everything is point of view. And so it's pure cinema. And Hitchcock himself would use Rear Window as an example of what it means to control the audience through the film. And that's why he could care less about method actors. That when they would want to know what the motivation for the scene was, he says, "You don't need to know the motivation for the scene. I supply the motivation for the scene by how I edit it." And he would give the example from Rear Window of Jimmy Stewart, and the shot he shoots is Jimmy Stewart is sitting there, and he puts the binoculars up, and he looks at something, and he smiles. What does that mean? Well, if he puts a cut where he lifts the thing up, and then we cut to a girl stripping across the way, seen through the window, and then cut back to the smile, that's one reaction. If he takes that same cut and puts in a little girl playing with a ball now with a dog, now it's a completely different smile. Same smile. He decides what the image means, not you or the actor. And that's pure cinema in there. He was a visual storyteller. And also the use of the background music there, although there is a very sharp dialogue in the movie, so much of it's told visually. The opening of the movie starts out with a pan across a bunch of photographs and a camera and stuff, and he's telling the story of who Jimmy Stewart's character is, and also the girlfriend is the same way. He sets all of his stuff without any dialogue. It's all pure visual, even though there are moments, usually involving Thelma Ritter. I'm a great Thelma Ritter fan, the little old lady that was playing the nurse in there. And she, was a wonderful character actress in the late 40s and 50s. Did some television work, but is in that. She was in Titanic. She played not the Cameron Titanic, but the 1951 Titanic, Barbara Stanwyck, and which is way before. There's been more than Titanic movie, kids. And she played kind of a Molly Brown character in there. Was always playing cards with the Clifton Webb character. The movie won an Oscar, by the way, for screenplay. It's a superb screenplay, and I think was written by the same people who did either Patton or The Day the Earth Stood Still. I can't remember which was who was connected. I get off on tangents of the people who do films of who does the screenplays for them and who does the editing and who does the cinematography and stuff. The kind of you could make a whole film festival of James Wong Howe movies. He's a cinematographer. You could put in Citizen Kane, and you have a whole bunch of films going all the way into the 1950s. And that you realize how they look the way they do because of that cinematographer. They sound the way they do because of the composer. They have the editing they do. Robert Wise, who did The Sound of Music, started out as a film editor on Citizen Kane and did Day the Earth Stood Still and Star Trek: The Motion Picture and all of these things. You find threads of stuff that allow you to look at a film in a very different way. And so with Hitchcock, you're thinking of how it's used as editing, how it's used as music, how the framing of things, everything is precise, and it's in VistaVision, which was a super widescreen process that was on a gigantic screen, but the film ran sideways through the projector like IMAX in 70 millimeter today, and is now an extinct film form. Although it's still used because the resolution on it is so spectacularly good that the special effects, if you've seen the Batman films, like second and third Batman movies, a lot of the special effects footage was filmed in VistaVision and then mixed in with Panavision and the IMAX stuff that they were using on because it had such great resolution. Anyway, the aspect ratio is like an old style film, but slightly wider. And Hitchcock, that was as far as he could go on widescreen because CinemaScope, like Woo and Cinerama, and all of these are giant, super widescreen things. But VistaVision is more like what he was used to with Academy frame, as it was called. British Academy frame is almost the same aspect ratio. And everybody knows what that is. We can remember an old television set because a television set was formatted in the same aspect ratio as the original films. And so that was the thing. And then when widescreen came along in our 16:9 TV set, which is a little like the VistaVision format. Anyway, when Hitchcock did North by Northwest for MGM, they would have filmed it in CinemaScope. But Hitchcock didn't like CinemaScope. So he had them film it in VistaVision. So it's one of the very few MGM movies that if you look at the opening credits, there will be filmed in VistaVision because Hitchcock didn't want to do George Stevens, the director who did Giant, which is another film. I should type that in there. If you haven't seen Giant with Liz Taylor and James Dean and all that, then you need to. That's from 1956. Fabulous motion picture. Anyway, he didn't like widescreen either and never filmed it. And Stevens' snark at the time was widescreen is good for filming class photographs, class films, graduation pictures, and snakes. That's the only thing that widescreen was good for. And so he never did anything in that format. Whereas another director, David Lean, who started out as a film editor, but he started out in the sound era in the 1930s. When CinemaScope and Panavision came along in the 1950s, he jumped on that. So by the time we get to Lawrence of Arabia and those films that he was making in the 50s and 60s, he was, whoa, and he just enjoyed that gigantic frame, and he could just play around with the artistry of it in a way that Hitchcock never could. He was stuck with that 1920s film image. Well, there we go. And I think we've been having a really long long view of stuff going on in the live chat there. Lisa for Truth, I think, has just compared Donald Trump to Akhenaton. That she would like to have him treated like the Egyptians treated Akhenaton. For those of you who aren't up on your Egyptology, Akhenaton was the pharaoh who tried to turn away from the old Theban cult of Osiris and all the rest and worship the Aten, the sun disk. And it lasted only as long as he was alive. And after it was over, and his little kid, Tutankhamun, was put back on the throne, and eventually possibly died in a traffic accident or murdered, depending upon, probably just died from a traffic accident chasing after somebody in a chariot. Anyway, the new regime, the restored religion, just obliterated every trace of Akhenaton. So they removed sculptures off of walls and dismantled temples. And in fact, they found some of the stuff. I think a whole bit of some of the Amarna material was found as the rubble inside of later temples that were used as fill. So anyway, so she is advocating with a certain amount of rancor, which I can share, that's how we should be treating Donald Trump, is to render him as absolutely obliterated as Akhenaton was in Egyptian history. Although we still know about the little bastard, so it wasn't completely successful. So anyway, we're past the half hour. We've actually got a full hour show because we started a little bit early on that to have a good connections. So let's, if you want to give us any final bit, then I'll queue up my the advertisement for the book here. So what do you have to say for yourself, kid?
Next video is going to be a lengthy one, and it's going to have a special guest that we will be unveiling soon.
Ooh, is that the one about the bats?
Yep, that's the video, RJ.
Yes, I'm all right. You can't keep a secret around with me. But anyway, because it really it was an absolutely delightful one. It is a longer one typically than that, but what I'm looking forward to is to see the visuals, because even though I've seen the script for it, that's only half of the game. I give you a little nods off about how well you do your videos and things, and the selection of images and the phylogenetic information and all of that. It really crystallizes it in a way that just talking head RJ I don't think is nearly as effective on. So I must give you compliments there, monsieur.
Oh, well, thank you, because so that's next. Then another video is or then the next video that I will be making, though it may or may not be the next video we put out, is the Darwin Day video, because that comes out on February 12th.
Oh, Darwin Day, February, so. Yes, yeah, aka Abraham Lincoln's birthday.
Yeah, and apparently Dapper Dinosaur, Erica, aka the Gutsick Gibbon, and I will be on a panel. I guess we'll be on a panel put together by some guys from some sort of secular society, and we'll be discussing creationism on Darwin Day. And I don't know what channel that's going to be on, though. So I guess
I've heard those things
maybe by next week I'll have it.
I'm available too.
They reached out to me. I didn't know who they were, but or they reached out to us.
Yeah, if they want me to join, unless of course it's in StreamYard, in which case it will probably be doomed because StreamYard has such a problem with me.
Yeah, Beej mentioned a Darwin Day video. Yeah, I always try to do a Darwin Day video. Last year we did the team up with Gutsick Gibbon for Darwin Day, and then the year before that, I don't remember what we did, but I try to put a video out on Darwin Day because he's a cool guy.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, we'll continue to talk here because the sound typically doesn't run. I'll go ahead and show our advertisement for our wee little book that we have written, and you can do voiceover as well. Since I don't think the music actually shows up on the side end there. We will be doing volume 2 in due course. And I've been collecting information from my end. I'm sure Jackson has been doing that from his end. And once the weather warms up a little bit here, I will be diving into my chapters on the flood geology stuff and the cosmology material, Jason Lyle, and the Grand Canyon and all that wonderful stuff. Whoops. There we go. It's packed with facts and references. Oh, yes, indeed it does.
Packed with facts.
There we go.
RJ
yes,
Index.
It was a delightful little project to do, and all came about from such a lowly thing. You just communicate. He says, "Hey, RJ, would you like to do a book together on that? The Answers in Genesis books?" And let me see, as I recall, it took me up to like a quarter of a microsecond to say yes.
Well, yeah, but at the time we thought it was only one book. We thought it was just the first Answers book.
Yeah, and then it just kept growing and
Come to
growing.
find out there's 4 of them.
And now, well, I recognized that it would be a lot of material, but finally it reached the stage where I was having conniption fits. I'm going, this is a lot of material we pulled together here. I don't think this is going to fit in one book. And so then I did the momentous thing of suggesting maybe we can split it into 2. And that then required retooling and figuring out how we were going to divide the chapters up and cross-referencing. But I think it was a worthwhile bit because it allows us also to keep very up to date. So when the volume 2 comes out, there will be additional information. And then, of course, there was the evolution slam dunk over here. Dapper says he's hoping to do a little show on evolution slam dunk. The dinosaur veering over into the Therapsids as a side bit. And then even worse, there is the Paralogs of Phileas Fogg novel. And I'm now knee deep in the Lake Fundudzi, and perilous things are going to be happening with Helios airship there in 1879. So I'm right in the final stages of that. It took a long time to write, although the plot worked out quite early on, but it was just the execution of it to make sure that it was as well written and as pithy as the first book there. Anyway, thank you, Jackson, for being able to be here today. Our gain was the grocery store's loss. And I know all of those wonderful customers one interacts with. From my old days working at a department store, there are people there that even without masks or with masks could be a distressing thing to can deal with. But we've all got our little side projects on this. And I suppose it's one nice side benefit from all of the pandemic plague stuff is that people like us that are doing our work by research online can do that unimpeded because we're able to do all of the stuff that we deal with. Anyway, let's see. We got yes. Where is my sequel to the Paralogs? Eat Meal. Yes, he was one of the very early readers. And by the way, Eat, because of you, I am deliberately referring to someone foxing somebody. That refers to the episode that takes place in the first Paralogs novel. That Auda will actually be referring to that as foxing. And I've had that built into the personalities of it because he was, and you'll have to read the book to find out what we're talking about. So it's a rip snorting tale. You got mystery science fiction, historical period detail, Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, a whole bunch of stuff, all delightfully mashed together on here. And I'll be doing novel after novel. I got about a dozen of the series that I work on, which is a nice way to relax when I'm walking off. I'm supposed to hide that message from this thing. Why will that not disappear now? There we go. Okay. Well, anyway, kids, everybody stay safe. Stay safe in the fact that there's rumors that the nutball Trumpistas are going to be doing protests all over the place. There were a bunch that were trying to break into our governor's mansion here in Washington State on the 6th. And so there's upset circumstances all over the country on things. Well, damn it, we're not going to let them take our republic away now, are we? Indeed. See you next week, kids. Yeah.